Hey everyone, and welcome to my podcast. I am the designer, fabricator, maker for HiFi Case, and I'm taking some time out to interview friends of mine that make cool stuff that contribute to the vibe of listening to music. And today we got Jake from Serek Basses here in Chicago. Awesome interview, great designer, just all around good dude. So check it out. Jake Serek.
What's up?
Serek Basses. Thanks for
Yes.
joining.
Yes.
I have one of your basses. It's right here.
I see it. It's
It's a
beautiful.
crown jewel in my music listening.
I think that's one of the first 5 strings we built in that like configuration with the walnut and maple Sacramento solid body.
I have like the model 01 of the
Something like
Sacramento
that.
fiber.
Yeah. One
That's
of the
awesome.
first for sure. Yeah.
So this whole thing is just new to me, but it's all about people that create really cool stuff that add to the vibe of listening to music.
Yes.
And I think there's definitely a vibe to your gear that's totally unique, and that's why I have one. And so to that end, like, what brought you to this design and doing this? Because it is super unique and you can't get it anywhere else. It's not like making copies of Fenders and trying to iterate on them. This is totally unique.
Yeah. I guess I've always been like kind of a collector. Since I started playing the instrument, I've always been on Craigslist and eBay and Reverb and just, like collecting weird, rare, vintage, whatever I can get my hands on, anything kind of unique. And throughout that process, I guess I was subconsciously just like cataloging things that I liked and didn't like, and slowly sort of forming an idea of not necessarily like what the perfect bass would be, but just a bass that doesn't exist that I would want to see. And so, some of the design elements I think are more obvious than others. Obviously, I love Rickenbacker's. The Midwestern is a take on the Epiphone Newport and stuff. That's no secret. So there's definitely some hints that are a little stronger than others. But what solidified kind of going more in that direction, I guess, was when I spent some time at Lakeland, being interning there, and just seeing it was, how successful they were just making essentially copies of Fender and Music Man style basses, more or less. I'm not knocking that at all. I really loved those instruments and I loved my time there, but I wasn't about to like jump into that competition ring, because there's already plenty of amazing builders out there doing that. So it was just like, all right, this is a thing. And then on the other side of the spectrum, you've got Alembic and sort of Federa. I lump in like all of like the sort of wood porn basses together, like just super boutique, high quality exotic tops, active preamps, all that kind of stuff, which I love those instruments as well. But I was just kind of thinking like where in between these two ends of the spectrum, if that's the spectrum that I'm sort of drawing out there.
Yeah.
Where can I go?
I think that's why I gravitated towards it, because it had, that the other basses you mentioned, they're kind of like this, almost like an alien aesthetic to them. You've never seen them before, and that's cool.
Yeah.
Yours has like this analog feel, right? There's no active EQ. You're using some really natural woods, natural finishes, and I think that just added to my overall, like, I was getting in the vinyl and just that whole vibe. So, and everyone's got, a lot of people in their music room have a guitar or something hanging up nearby. And so it just added to the overall sort of my personal vibe of setting up the music room. And then once I got it, you just kind of opened the door to like things I never thought of before, like short scale basses, which just the feeling of playing is easier, right? I'm enjoying it more than being so stretched out on a Fender, and then the weight of it, and then just all these tones that I didn't have on those other basses. Like it was all kind of fit that whole aesthetic. So I don't know how you came to those ideas, but I mean, totally.
The short scale thing was, it's like sort of a right place, right time, but also like happy accident thing. Like I didn't set out at the beginning just to say like, okay, I want to build short scale basses and this is like going to be our thing. I think as we sort of started to gather a following, our client base and like followers started to dictate that for us. But the Sacramento was sort of the real, like the first real, I guess like homegrown design that I went after. And I had it in my head that I wanted to just make it the most compact thing possible. I own a Rickenbacker 4003. I've got P basses and J basses and, just, big, clunky, old, full scale instruments from the 70s and stuff. And I'm like, let's just do an experiment and see how much we can shrink this down without sacrificing on the output and like what this thing is actually functioning for,
Yeah. Well, the 70s were awesome for that.
Yeah,
The design was, even the old stereos back then are just big, heavy silver face knobs. They just look really cool, but they were so heavy.
Right. I mean, things were built to last, which is nice. Like there's a lot of good quality out there, and like materials were all, I think, a little more sturdy. Plastic wasn't as ubiquitous as it is today, and in everything. So I love that side of things too. But from a bass player's perspective, like, the 70s are notorious for just boat anchors, just 13-pound Music Man sabers and all that, all that stuff. And so nobody wants that. There's a lot of guys out there who have neck and shoulder and back issues and all that. So it was kind of just like, how much can we trim this down with it still sounding good and like a bass, and the answer is quite a bit. So
well, yeah. And tone, like pickups, everything have really evolved since then, just like modern electronics, right? Those old amps are awesome, but now they've got these, tiny Class D amps that can get you there pretty close, and then they're adding the signal processing, but the form, they've lost it. It's plastic, right? And so what you took that golden age of like really cool design and gave it the modern sort of, not only construction, right? Because everyone's learned so much from building since then, but also the electronics you pick.
That's a big
kind
part
of perfect.
Of it. It's like when it comes to design, because this is what we're talking about, right? This is a design podcast. So like I've never thought of myself as like a designer or an artist or anything like that. Like I don't have a background in drawing or even like drafting or CAD or anything like that, really. So I'm kind of like almost uncomfortable when I like around that word in a weird way.
Imposter syndrome.
A little bit, because I'm, again, like if you see like some of the, I've hand sketched a lot of designs that have become instruments that we build, but they are not pretty. It takes a lot of tweaking, and I usually end up doing most of the design work on the computer with, vectors and all that stuff. That makes it a lot easier to make things look pretty. But it's an interesting, I like want to pose the question almost like, what is design? Because not to get like super meta here, but it's such a subjective thing, right? How do you know when something is done? How do you know when it like looks just right?
Well,
and it's interesting to me. I just want to it's interesting to me that like we've created some of these bases that I eventually, after months and months and months of looking at them, was like, this looks right to me. I think let's try and build it. And then other people like agree. And so where do we find that like common thread with design? How do we all kind of agree that mid-century modern furniture looks really good, and like, all that kind of thing? Like, where does that come from?
Right. Well, first of all, to let you know, you are a designer, because the process you just put in place is exactly what design does. Now, the only difference being is you designed it for yourself, and you took into account playability and just your own sort of needs. The only difference I could see is that a commercial design, they're trying to account for the needs of many people and put themselves in their shoes.
Right.
But you took like the method acting approach to design, where you became the person, and it just so happens that other people had the same feelings as you. So you skipped the research of like everyone else, and you made what felt right. So maybe it's a mix of art and design is what you did there, because art is completely subjective, right? It's some kind of story they're telling, whereas design is based on form and function, and you had needs that you needed to solve for. So it's basic problem solving is really what design comes down to. And I think we all learned it early on in education in America that I don't want to get too out there, but
Right.
critical thinking skills was pressed upon us in the US as kids, and not so much in China. China was like, we're going to manufacture, and that was a strategy for them. So that's how, America's so great. Not going there too far. I'm just saying though, like, it was pressed upon us to have those like sort of critical thinking skills and to question things, and from that framework, you set up the problem you're setting out to solve.
Yeah. Well, I mean, when you put it that way, that makes a lot of sense. And that kind of ties together the process of, like what I was saying, just collecting things, looking at them, being like, why is this here?
Discovery.
When it could be over here. Yeah. Yeah. It's playful and fun in that way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've been the same as going with this Aura 2. I'm still nitpicking it. And I've got people that are like, just ship it. And I'm like, it's so close.
You're dialing it in, man. I mean, it looks great. Everything you're putting out, like and I can see all the little tweaks you're making along the way, and you're just refining and refining.
Yeah.
But that's an ongoing process. I mean, even with what we've been doing, I still make tweaks to, even like throughout the years, I'll make subtle tweaks to some of the lines of the body shapes and things. Cause after you look at it for 2 years, you're just like, this bothers me. This could just be a little slimmer right here. That, I think that's the fun part about watching things develop. I mentioned, like, obviously I love Rickenbacker, and it's very obvious. You can watch like the way that the 4000 series base shape changed throughout the years. It started off a little more on the slim side, kind of where it is today. And then like in the 80s, the horns got super chunky. The neck shapes all changed. The headstock has gone through so many different iterations. And I mean, I like that kind of fluidity and that flexibility to be able to just say like, no, this isn't just the product and it'll never change. Like, this can kind of grow with us as we go. And so you got to be open to that, I think.
Well, with the Rickenbacker, I always wanted to play one. I didn't pick one up until last year. I went down or maybe the year before, I went to Chicago Music Exchange, which talk about a vibe for just hanging out and picking up instruments. But that's a separate thing. But I picked that bass up. I didn't know how to hold it. I felt very awkward. It had the pick cover on it. It had the thumb rest, everything, all this chrome. It looked beautiful. Yeah. And I just couldn't get comfortable holding it. Yeah. And I was like, this is going to really change the playing style of whoever picks it up. I mean, with the one that you made for me, my playing style completely changed. And so much so that I was like actually like getting into different music. And so it's all part of that, adventure you go on when you get a new piece in your home, like an instrument or a record or speakers or whatever, that tour poster. You're kind of just hanging out looking at it, and it's changing your your outlook on things, which I think is all part of listening to music, is just going to that different place.
Yeah, definitely. It's interesting, like you mentioned, kind of playing a Rickenbacker later in your sort of career as a bass player. For me, the 4003 was my second bass. I'm a little spoiled in that regard because it's a nice instrument to have as a beginner, but I sort of learned how to play on that. And so I think I've been fortunate in that way that I started with, I didn't realize it was sort of like a clunky, difficult instrument to play. So I just dealt with it. And then throughout the years, I was like, oh, wow, this bass is much easier. This is even better. And I think I've just been slowly spoiling myself into now, where I'm probably a lot like much more like a softy of a player than I used to be, because I'm used to just like effortless, like this takes no effort to play. And then I pull my Rick out and I'm like, how did I do this? But I still love it. Like I still like when I pull that bass out of the case, it still does that like Pulp Fiction, like opening the briefcase, light, gold light shining on me kind of moment, still just does it for me. But
my first was a Gibson EB3 that my uncle loaned me, and it had all the switches and the double humbuckers, and I'm there trying to play like Nirvana at 14 on this, and then tried to do some Red Hot Chili Peppers slap bass on this thing, which is impossible. And I was like, so now I want it back. It's been 20 years. I was like calling my uncle. I was like, let me know before you let that one
Yeah.
go.
Yeah.
And but it was so different. And then the next bass I had was this Ibanez, and then this long trajectory going in the wrong direction of basses where I went Ibanez, Warwick, never went Schecter because it's just too much.
Yeah.
And then found my way back like 10 years later, Fender Jazz Bass, everything I ever needed.
You know what? That one is really, I think the P and the J are really still the greatest of all time. Like the P bass for me particularly, I love just the simplicity and the do anything nature of it. But the jazz bass is really like the most versatile out there, and it really does cover like 95% of what anyone would ever need to do on an
Yeah.
instrument. Yeah, there's nothing more to say. Those are great instruments.
Yeah. And yet I haven't picked it up since I got my new Sacramento.
That's good.
It's there for nostalgia at this point, just from,
Yeah.
all the shows you played and all that stuff.
Yeah, and I think it's important if you're, if you're really, depends on like what you're doing, but I've come to appreciate having like a wider arsenal, so to speak, especially doing like more recording and session work. I've always like romanticized the idea of the one bass, like the one that can do it all, like my instrument, kind of like, are you familiar with Lee Sklar?
Yeah.
He had like that P bass with the 2P pickups that he's recorded on like 10,000 different sessions or something crazy. But I've come to learn that like I just need to accept different paintbrushes in my box, and
Yeah.
it's been really fun to just go a little further outside the realm of what I would normally stick in. Like I've been collecting some short scale old hollow body instruments that are just super funky and thuddy, but they record beautifully.
Yeah.
I could never really play out with them, but in the studio they're amazing, stuff like that.
Yeah. I was looking at the reissues. I think Ibanez actually had a hollow body for like $550, right?
Yeah.
And I was like, that was kind of fun to play.
Yeah.
I don't know if I could do it I can't do it for every song.
Right.
But it was cool. So that might be something anyway.
Yeah.
Add to the collection. So what I thought was interesting too is like, I don't know, there's this Chicago style, or maybe I'm trying to own it too much, of these darker tones with this like brass hardware. And it is very much like the mid-century modern style without some of the nonsense. I mean, some of the colors are still a little more muted than you would look at. And then there's obviously this California style, everything's super light and stuff. And
yeah,
I don't know. I just see that vibe in Chicago. Did that influence you, just going to these bars and seeing bands, listening to music all around here?
I think so. I mean, yeah, it's still more or less has like a working class vibe, we've got working class roots here. And I think that pushed me to stay more function over form a little bit, and just keeping things simpler. And I did early on, like there was a good while there where my two buddies Zach and Benny, who have both been helping me out still, working building the instruments, they were doing all my finish work early on before I had a booth. And so for the most part, most of the instruments coming out were all just natural wood with an oil finish, because I could just do that myself. And so it was very much that kind of just natural, like dive bar kind of vibe, I guess.
Yeah.
And then I discovered, when I finally got a booth and I discovered that I could mix colors pretty easily and do that, I really appreciated kind of lightening things up a little bit and having a lot more fun with that. And I think a lot of our customers really have like gone wild with that too. The fact that we can custom mix colors, people have some really interesting requests and stuff.
Yeah. So I think I asked you for like a Nightcrawler idea with some Purple Heart or something.
Yeah. I mean, it's cool. It's cool. I love, because color does so much. I mean, you can only change the form of the instrument so much, and what you put, the pickups and hardware and stuff that you put on it. But the color alone and pick guard material can just completely change the vibe of the instrument, which is so cool to me.
Well, I think maybe I'm wrong, but the final finish can actually affect the tone.
Yeah. I don't know if you read a while back, So like, did you ever follow? Are you a Smashing Pumpkins fan at
Of
all?
course, yeah.
So like a while back, Billy recently like reclaimed his old Gish guitar that had been
Oh,
stolen. It was like a kind of a beat up blue Stratocaster that was stolen from the band a long time ago, and somehow it ended up back. This lady had like bought it from a yard sale or something and found out it was his, and he got it back. But they went on this whole tangent about like why that guitar was so special and why it was so important to like the early sound of the band. And one thing Billy made kind of a bold and controversial claim that the color of paint will actually affect the sound of the guitar. And people lost their minds. They're like, okay, like we've heard of, like poly versus nitro, but you're telling me that like a blue versus a white guitar can sound different? Like, come on. But there's actually something to that, because if you look at Fender in particular, there I'm not going to be able to give you like the exact specifics, but they did use different types of paint based on the color. So like for instance, I think some of the metallic paints were poly versus
sure.
some of the solid colors were lacquer or something like that. So you could make a case for that, but the answer is like the short answer is yes, the finish can definitely affect it, but mostly in terms of like how much you're putting on the instrument and the type of finish, because poly is obviously a lot harder than
Yeah.
lacquer and all of that. So
Well, now you got me thinking about Vanta Black, which is that
yeah, yeah,
like how would that affect? Because it just absorbs sun. Does it
it would
absorb
just
have acoustic properties?
it would ruin it. It would just suck all the tone in, like a black hole.
You hit the string and no sound comes out.
No output.
Oh man. Well, now we
Yeah,
got to try that.
right.
I think the other thing, like your whole shop vibe is got this really cool setup. And I know there's pictures on your site, but I mean everything on your site, everything has that sort of, kind of a nostalgia tone or sort of film to it.
Hmm.
Um, which I love. So I think it's just you're sort of extending like what you're into when you're listening to music and sharing your music room, and it's coming out in the instruments too, which I think is
Yeah,
cool.
yeah.
With
All of it seeps in.
so one thing, what music? Like if there was like you're gonna have a cocktail party on or whatever, or have some,
Mm,
you're gonna have a vibe where it's like this is a nice day, we were celebrating. What would you put on?
interesting. Well, I was in charge of the playlist at my friend's 4th of July hangout the other day, and so that basically just started with sort of like a general Motown soul R&B
Oh
kind of
yeah,
playlist, because it's just the grooves are infectious. A lot of times it can end up being wallpaper music because it's like such a sound that's recognizable that all of the songs can kind of blend together, but
sure.
it's happy music, it's upbeat. Obviously there's great bass grooves and
Every
like
every single one of
all
them.
of that, even like into starting, disco and all that kind of stuff. So that's always like a safe bet if I'm just like, I just want everyone to have a good time and not really think about it. Um, yeah, I think that's my answer. But then so this is maybe a little bit of a tangent here, but I used to pride myself on being able to know exactly what I wanted to listen to in any given moment. Like that
Wow.
whole that
This
whole
could be a
cliche.
whole half hour.
I'll try and go through it real quick. Like the whole cliche of like, music is the soundtrack to your life. I used to be
Yeah.
able to like be like, it's a rainy day, I'm feeling a little melancholy, it's kind of early in the morning, like this is what I'm gonna put on, like
Yep.
to the track, to the album, whatever. And I think that Spotify kind of ruined me, man. Like I
I know.
love the beat, like to be able to just put on whatever I want. I love to be able to make playlists that are a lot more varied, but I've lost a little bit of attention span for albums. Um,
Yeah.
and I've lost that ability to kind of like dive back into myself and like connect the music with whatever emotion I'm feeling. Now it's just kind of like, oh, here's my liked songs, or like here's a playlist of generally what I want to listen to, and I've lost like getting in and learning who plays on what album and where it was
Yeah.
recorded and all that kind of stuff. I don't know. It's an interesting
No, I get it.
conversation.
I mean, it's like it's hard to discover new music too because you're relying on some algorithm to tell you, or
Right.
there's just this constant, there's so much content out there, it's hard to know where you're going. I think the one cool thing we had in Chicago was there's that group called Uncanned Music, and they'll supply audio for some fancier restaurants, right? So I remember
Yeah,
going
yeah.
to like, it wasn't Au Cheval, it was some other place, but it was in Fulton Market, and I heard this song. I can't remember the name of them now, but they had a really cool album. I heard this song while we are eating dinner, and we were having a good time. And I'm just like, I gotta find this song later. And I got like Shazam going, like,
Right, right.
and there's so much noise in the restaurant, it's not picking it up. I was like, this is a bummer. I need to know what this is.
Yeah,
Um, but you know, you're gonna attach that song to where you found it too. Like I
right.
remember what I was, you know, the vibe of the room I was in. And I know it's kind of newer to Chicago, but I was seeing there's like Japanese listening rooms in Japan. There's a whole bar set up around music. There's a whole wall of vinyl records. There's a
Yeah,
DJ,
yeah,
and then nice cocktails, and the room just looks, you know, a lot of wood tones and feels very
yeah,
like warm.
yeah. That's great
Anyway,
stuff. I mean, that's music as design, you know, using music to design the atmosphere and to complete sort of the ambiance of a space. I appreciate that. That's really cool. And um, I give a lot of respect to DJs who can do that really well too. I've got a few friends who like stick to vinyl. They just bring their, you know, suitcases full and like they are excellent at just like picking out the song and keeping whatever room they're in like alive. And that's a
oh yeah,
huge
oh it's
skill.
so easy to misfire when you're doing that at home.
Yeah.
Like this track just totally ruined the mood.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, and that's the problem I have. Like trying to find good music that's new, that's fresh to bring. I mean,
Yeah.
soul is just this endless catalog. I think that's always a safe bet, like you were
Right.
saying.
Right. It's
Uh,
interesting too, I think, sort of tying it back in to design too. So I feel like as I get older, you're continuously like adding and accumulating sort of a knowledge of what you've what you've had inputted into your brain, whether
yep.
it be music, design, anything like that, visual, audio. And so as you get older and older, you're like simultaneously more discerning because you're just like, nope, like this doesn't fit, get it out of here. You won't
Yeah.
even, you're not like in some way like not as open to it because you have like formed what you like. But it's interesting because I wonder, like, are we sort of, as we get older, do we sort of narrow our mind space a little bit?
I mean, there is
Like,
that. There's
we
guys
know
still listening to Kiss on their boat, you know.
we have more knowledge in here, but we're also like, we let less in because of that. And sometimes I wonder like what a good process would be. I'm always curious, like for artists and creatives who are able to sort of just like cleanse and then start fresh. I can't do that as well. Like I get stuck on what
It's
I know and
risky.
what I like. Yeah, it is, right? You know?
You might
So
end up going down a rabbit hole that you just don't enjoy. Or the other thing though is there's sometimes songs that you just weren't ready for.
yeah.
You know, you have a song that
Mm.
you heard 20 years ago, and it's like, this has new meaning now. Like things happened.
That's true. There have been a lot of bands that I've tried to get into 10 years ago or whatever, and it just didn't quite hit, and then come back to it in just the right place and time. And it's like, oh, now this makes sense. I'm still waiting for that to happen with Fish. I was talking to a buddy of mine who's way into Fish, and I'm like, Corey, it never hit me,
Yeah.
man. Like I've got no problems. I'm not dissing them, but like maybe in like my 40s, I'll go way into Fish. You know, I'll try it again.
You have an extreme lack of tie-dye and psychedelic graphics behind you. So
But I love the Dead. I mean, I'm definitely like a minor Deadhead of sorts. So I have that bone in my body for sure.
yeah. Oh, I don't know. I think it's fun. I almost want when people come to hang out now that we're post COVID to
Yeah.
just bring a playlist. Like, can you bring a record or some songs? Because I can't DJ all night. Like I'm gonna hear the same album over and over.
Right.
I know it was safe.
That's another. I mean, that's interesting too. I think that speaks to just how much like in-person interaction can influence what you're into.
Oh
And
yeah.
so
You,
like Spotify is basically the social media of music, and so we're just looking at other people's playlists and what our friends are listening to, but we're not in a room talking about an experience that we had with an album, or even better, experiencing it together. Like in high school, me and my buddy John would just like sit in his basement with the lights off and just like listen to full albums all the way
Yeah.
through, and like not even really talking, like now I like can't even like fathom doing that anymore, like finding people who have the patience for that, and we would
Yeah.
just sit there in the dark listening to like Animals by Pink Floyd, or we did the Zyreka 4-disc thing, the Flaming Lips album, and we would just like, you know, even all without like drugs or anything, just like
Yeah.
getting high on the experience of like, holy shit, this is crazy, this music is nuts,
You're going on a ride, man.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know.
My experience was definitely strange. So my dad played in the cover band. So there'd be every Tuesday night, they're just blowing out the whole house. There's not a quiet room that you can go to. So I'm like listening to Alice Cooper and Beatles and all just this random dad rock stuff from them.
Yeah.
But my own personal experience was at a friend's house. I think we were like 6th grade, and someone brought the Rage Against the Machine album and put it on the Casio boombox. And we were just like, because we were just like a couple years past Nirvana when we were getting into music. So that was our thing. And we were just like, oh my God.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's different. I mean, that would have been what, our Led Zeppelin, right? That was like,
Right.
Oh.
And it gets hard. I think it just gets, as you get older, maybe it gets a little harder to have your mind blown wide open like that.
I'm open. My mind's open. There's
open-minded, sure, but like to be completely floored by something. That's my question, I guess, of the day is like, is it harder to get your mind blown because it's happened so many times and you're desensitized and I've seen a lot of things already, or are things just less mind-blowing now? Like, is music less exciting than it used to be? I don't know. There's some really great stuff still happening.
Don't get jaded on me now, Jake.
I'm trying not to. No, there's a lot of really great things.
There's definitely songs where it comes on and I'm just like, this is on repeat the rest of the day. Like I'm pulling out every single vibe out of this, every instrument change, like what weird chord progression for like the next 3 hours. And then because I get like ADHD on it, right?
Yeah.
I'm stuck.
Yeah.
And then hope that the rest of the album follows suit. And but I think there's plenty of stuff still coming out. I was trying to think of some recent, what caught me out of nowhere is people do these breakdowns now of songs.
Yeah.
And Nirvana, like, Smells Like Teen Spirit. Like, it was the first song they learned on bass.
Mm-hmm.
That's what like they teach you because you got that stretch. And then I was like, yeah, okay, this is cool. And then I was watching someone break it down and they soloed every track. And then there was like, there's a Butch Vig version of this that was mastered differently. And so I start going down that and I want to hear all that stuff.
Yeah.
And now like maybe people are hanging out not listening to like albums, but they can watch that video and play it through their stereo and just
even like some artists are doing, like throughout COVID, especially if they'll do like a Patreon subscription and you can actually watch them break down like their Logic sessions or something like of Montreal. Kevin Barnes was doing that where he's like, here's the Logic session for this song, and he'll just like go through and be like, here's what the vocals sound like and here's how many times I layered the harmonies. And like that's cool because it's giving people the tools to create themselves and to like be a little less afraid of the technology, and to also just see like, wow, this full product that you hear at the end when the album's out is really attainable if you just break it down into these steps. Like you can all do this too, and that's really empowering, and that's a definitely like a cool thing that's happening.
Yeah, he took the Kurt Cobain melody and played it on piano, and it's just goosebumps, right?
Yeah.
Like, whoa. All right, I'm back. The other thing, you brought this up, artists doing interesting stuff. Post Malone, those covers, wearing a sundress.
Yeah.
Was just like, this is rock, like, kids, gather around. This is what it was like. This is what we wanted to be when we started playing music.
Mm-hmm.
You're slamming some beers and you're getting loose.
Yeah.
And making noise. I mean, that I don't know. Maybe it's a Neanderthal way of thinking because there's some music out there that's so pristine, and I'm just like, I enjoy that, but when I play, I enjoy this.
Energy. It's energy. Me and my buddies used to have it was partly a band, but partly just like an idea, and it was called Champs. And
Okay.
it ended up becoming a verb. It wasn't like let's go have champs practice. It was let's go champs. We're gonna go to the space and we're gonna champs all night long. And we would just like bring a 24 case and just like sometimes we would just play covers of Sabbath and whatever. Other times we would just like someone's like, I want to write a song about my mom and dad and how they met. And then we were just like, it was just fun, but like the energy was there. It was something sort of intangible that you can only get when you have people in a room collaborating and doing something together. And yeah, so it's kind of a different world because you've got like pop music on the one side, which is very much like created in a lab, and it's collaborative in a different sense. But then you've got like band energy, which is its own thing too. It's
That's its own vibe. I mean, there's
yeah,
times where I just want turn up the bass on the stereo, get the big speakers out,
yeah,
and we're just playing, songs from, bands we saw 20 years ago. And it's like,
yeah,
remember, we moshed to the front and
right,
and it's this whole thing. And then the whole volume, just like any good concert, the bass keeps getting turned up throughout the show, and
yeah.
it just becomes this whole thing.
Yeah, I've definitely been guilty of that a few times, just like slowly edging up the master volume a little bit.
Just a little more.
You gotta feel it. Yeah. Can I ask you a question? Am I allowed to do
Sure.
that?
Yeah.
So,
I know we only put 30 minutes. I'm cool to chat, but it's up to
we
you.
can go for a little while. That's fine. I'm good for a minute. I just back to like design and the process of designing a product. I guess in general, like how long do you let a design sit before you decide to take it to the next step? So like I'll draw out an instrument and tweak it and look at it for a really long time before I go and actually make the first prototype. And then from there, when you see it in real life for the first time, you immediately know what you need to change. Like in general, what is your process, and like how long do you give yourself to before you just go, okay, this is good enough, this is what it's going to be?
I'm just all in, like, immediately. The only thing stopping me is money and cost of materials, to be honest.
So you start building right away is what you're saying? Or
I'll get the general idea, right? And then I'll be doing as much research as I can. So I hit discovery immediately. Like, what else is out there? Like, I have this idea, start pulling things I like, but I'm immediately like, what are my cuts? What do I got to do to get this thing made?
Yeah.
And I'm rushing out there as soon as I can. And usually, and maybe it's good because I'll have to wait, right? Because I've got kids and there's other priorities. So like, but I'll be thinking about it.
Yeah.
And then a few days later, it's like, materials are here. All right, let's really make sure we don't waste. This is a good piece of walnut.
Yeah.
And start doing my cuts, and it engages everything, right? Because you're being creative, but you're also putting the stuff together. It's that left right brain. And then I get the prototype made, and it's just a prototype. Like, I know I'm gonna keep pushing.
Right.
So like this one back here, this was the fourth iteration already. The first one was there was a Grundig speaker that was just rotted out, and it was just meant to be an extension to the larger speaker cabinet, and like with a record player and everything. It was just no amp in it, nothing. And I'm like, I could turn this into a speaker standalone. This looks cool. And I'm pulling it apart, and I'm like, this whole thing's basically dry rotted wood. It's like 70-year-old wood. The speaker's got to go. So I'm like planning out form and function for speakers is there's a cubic volume you need, and so you have to find the right to get the full range, 20K to 20 hertz. So I'll do all of that stuff on the computer, but once that prototype's made, now I'm like analyzing it. I'm just staring it down,
Right.
And then you make revisions, and I think at some point early, and this is probably me trying to get too much attention, is I'm putting things out there as soon as I got the prototype, or I'm putting sketches out there on Instagram to get feedback. I talked to you about the mini box.
Right.
So that's all discovery. I mean, I'm doing that daily at my daytime job, which I won't mention, but it's the same process. You're just collecting as much feedback as you can early on so that you can continue to iterate.
I appreciate that answer. I think a lot of people get stuck in the early stage of just like the idea.
You just gotta
And
go.
I'm with you on that. I think if there's any advice that, you know, we can impart upon
Yeah.
listeners is just like do something and then react to it. I think that's a great way to go. Like get something that you feel comfortable with, whatever, even if it's a song idea, whatever we're talking about here, any creative thing, and just like start it. And then you have a momentum started, and then from there you kind of just follow your gut, your instincts,
Yeah.
feedback from peers that you trust, and then go from there. I think that's a great way to do it.
Well, and I mean, once you start showing it to people, it's almost like telling people like, oh, I'm gonna go lose 20 pounds this year, or I'm gonna quit smoking. Now you're accountable. People are
Right.
you'll see them again and they'll be like, so how did that go?
Right.
And so you
Yeah.
gotta keep going.
You gotta. Yeah. I'm with you on that. I've learned that I do need to like give myself a little bit of time on the design side on the early end, because I'll get really pumped on something and I'll like spend 3 weeks just like tweaking, making it look just right. And then I'll go like, that's great. All right. And then let's go do it. Let's build it. But I've learned that if I give myself like 1 week to just get rid of it out of my mind, don't think about it, don't look at it, don't show it to anybody. If I come back a week later, it looks completely different to me.
Yeah.
And if I still love it, then I know it's done. And if I'm still like, oh, okay, I missed something, then I know I needed to like cook it for just a little bit longer.
Yeah. That's good advice for everyone. I mean, you don't mix the day that you record. Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
you gotta leave.
You need a palate cleanser once in a while. You need to constantly be like kind of keeping your frame of reference and your perspective in check, I think, too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's just what do they call it? Self-awareness to a degree.
I guess so, yeah.
Some Midwestern qualities.
Self-awareness / insecurity. It's like
Yeah.
a fine line.
Well, and I think like anyone, even designer or anyone that's like ventured down a career, you look back at what you did 10 years ago and you're like, oof, I know that it wasn't my best stuff, right? And which makes you wonder like what's going to happen 10 years from now?
Yeah.
You know, where is this going to go?
I keep old sort of reject instruments and stuff at the shop sort of as a subconscious reminder of just like, this is where we were.
Yeah.
This is where we're going.
Yeah.
But I'm starting to feel a little bit of a sea change at the shop. I think like we've been cemented for long enough in what we've been doing, that I'm actually like ready for another sort of, we're going to obviously keep doing what we are doing, but I think, you know, ready for a new model or something to start creeping in, and you know, we'll see. Not teasing anything yet, because we're far from it, but
I'm going to have to hold you to that now.
Getting a little antsy. Plus there's some good chemistry at the shop. The guys that, you know, are working at the shop with me now are all really creative and have lots of ideas. So I'm eager to collaborate more and to sort of to share that, you know, a little bit more. So.
Yeah. Well, yeah, with all things right now, there was a glut on instrument orders in general. Didn't matter what it was.
Yep.
We're all at home. And then the wood shortage.
Yeah.
Or at least a price gouging on wood.
Right.
And then your labor shortage, right? Just like finding the right people. It's definitely a storm. I feel like I'm getting more orders right now than I have in a while.
Yeah.
And I think I saw you were looking for some help at the shop. And so I feel like you're probably going well.
Yeah, we need help. I don't know when this is going up, but we are currently hiring.
Go to serrickbases.com. Go to his Instagram. He needs help.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, and I think to sell that whole team effort, Atticus had a base that I saw you put on Instagram. I was like, that is slick. He pulled some wood color choices on that, and I was like, this is the real deal.
Yeah, and that's the kind of stuff I'm talking about. Like the guys are doing things that I might not have thought of, or I just, you know, but just letting them have their own voice. And Atticus has been designing pickups, and he actually is responsible for the final design of the pick guard on the grand bases as well. Nice. I was struggling with that for so long. I like literally like did printouts where it's just like the grand body over and over again, and I was just like sketching iterations, and I'm like, I can't get this. Someone else, Atticus, take a stab at it. And like 2 days later, I was like, oh shit, that's great, So
Yeah,
it's awesome to be able to have that kind of atmosphere.
that's awesome.
Yeah.
As far as like just going back to sourcing and stuff, I mean, that is such a part of the design process too, just finding the right woods, the grain,
Mm-hmm.
hardware.
Yeah. That all. Yeah.
Where, I mean, what was I going to say? How do you pick those?
The wood is just picking the right piece of wood is a choice structurally and in terms of weight and all of that. That's something I've just learned to kind of get a handle on. I knew the types of woods that I liked just based on other instruments I've had, and once in a while we'll just try something completely different to see what it ends up sounding like. So that wasn't too huge of an issue because we're relatively traditional in that sense. I guess we're using maple, mahogany, walnut, alder, poplar, those kinds of things. Hardware, we got pretty lucky that we have Hipshot. Hipshot's a great company. They make awesome tuners. Their bridges like fit the vibe of what we're going for. We use their 2-point supertone. We use the D style and the vintage style and on different models. And like, I'm very lucky to have found high quality hardware that also just like kind of looks right.
Yeah.
It's modern functionality, but they don't look too crazy and out there. And then pickups, that's probably the most like fluid thing that we have because we make our own pickups and we source from various other makers out there. And so that's really cool to find pickups not only that sound different, but have a different look to them too. Like the TV Jones pickups have a totally different vibe from like the Nordstrand stuff, which we use is just a more on the modern kind of soap bar side of things.
Yeah.
And I wish that it were easier to influence the aesthetic of pickups.
I know it.
It's so the upfront costs for making molds for pickup covers or, getting stamped, stuff for like making metal covers and trim rings and all that is just pretty astronomical. And unless you're making thousands of pieces, it's just not really cost effective. But I wish we could go down that rabbit hole a little bit more, because I love, clearly I love when there's more metal involved with the pickup.
Yeah.
I love nickel plated, just stuff. So
well,
I wish,
I have a secret for you.
Yeah.
I've been using sendcutsend.com.
Yes.
And I saw they'll do bending and stamping potentially.
Saw that too. So I had a run of neck bolt plates because I want to switch the grands over to neck plates instead of the washers we've been using.
Uh-huh.
And so I got some stainless steel ones cut just to see how the quality is and everything. And I was very impressed. And I think that could be a viable option. The only issue is then plating, finding a shop that would be willing.
Yeah, you have to polish it or plate
and you have to and there's a lot of handwork still involved, right? You get the pieces from them and you still have to deburr and clean up the edges a lot of times. So we're not quite in a space to be able to handle that amount of extra work, but maybe down the line that would be something.
I mean, I run into the same exact things you mentioned, right? Like when I was doing this, well, I still do the suitcase speakers, but it's like finding a suitcase, just guessing what people are going to want. I can't do that anymore. And I think that's how your model evolved too. You started doing custom orders.
Right.
And so, I followed the same kind of idea. Because you have so many pieces you've already made. They can just browse your site. Same for mine. Mm-hmm. But I'm limited. I'm looking for hardware and, trying to it's not easy to find a brass knob where you push it and it sticks in and it stays. Right. They're all momentary. And I'm like, I need it to stay.
Yeah.
And because I love that tactile feeling. And then now I got to cut a custom brass plate for that. And now I got to build my own LED to go in there. And it's just down the line. And your Hipshot is like my, there's a DIY company supplier called Parts Express that sells speakers and everything. And if they didn't exist, this wouldn't exist, right? I think a lot of DIY builders. But even then, I'm just, there's so much to pick through and to figure out what's going to work where, and get my aesthetic. And I think that's
Yeah.
part of the fun of it though, too.
Yeah. Yeah, it's hard. That's, I think, economies of scale is where it's most difficult for smaller makers like us. Like, it's just getting that level of custom that you want, but being able to afford
Yeah.
outsourcing some of that work in smaller quantities is just not feasible for a lot of smaller companies. So
That's where I feel like my role, I think, especially if in the future, is going to be more hands off of the production and more just design and concepts and prototypes and marketing. So
yeah,
um yeah, it sounds like you're headed that way as well. I mean, you were already coming up with these concepts.
a little bit. One thing we're in the middle of working on, and I'm hoping maybe by the end of the year we'll be able to roll it out, is we're building a configurator for the website, which I'm
Nice.
very excited about. There's a guy named Nikita. He runs an Instagram page called Bass Guitar Hub that a lot of people may be familiar with, where he just does beautiful mock-ups of instruments.
Oh,
So he's building our entire catalog layer by layer, like every option that we have. And so part of that process is we are actually sort of streamlining a little bit. We're still going to be a custom shop, but we're just kind of narrowing the field of options a little bit, because that's going to allow us to, yeah, look it up. That's going to
sorry.
allow us to sort no, all good. Allow us to sort of scale up a little bit, so to speak, but still maintain custom shop quality without just going to like stock builds, because that would be boring for everybody. So
Yeah, it would.
yeah,
I
but
think
I think
everyone, art,
yeah.
maker and buyer included, want some twist to it, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, yeah. But yeah, the configurator, we're really excited about that. I think that's been a challenge. Like, the biggest challenge for people who order from us is there's so many options and they don't know. They get like stuck on, well, what should I do for this fingerboard, or what should I do for like what pickups, are going to sound best together. And I think if you just get a visual representation, that's going to answer so many questions, because
Yeah.
right away it'll just go, yeah, that's what I want, or that's horrible. you know.
I'm good. I'm gonna tell you though, they're still gonna talk to you.
Oh yeah, no, and I'm going to keep it that way. That's a really important part of the process, like the feedback loop is of
Yeah.
just like talking to every customer. Like, I don't think maybe a lot of people realize that I'm still answering every email and I'm still
Yeah.
like answering all of your questions. That's a big part of my role, is just sort of like that knowledge base, I guess. But I really enjoy that part of it, because I get to sort of absorb a lot of the other perspectives from
Yeah.
people. And a lot of our customers have ended up pushing us in directions that we would have never thought of. So
That is exactly what a designer would do, by the way. So you don't need the degree. You've got the portfolio. It's
all right.
fine.
Sweet.
Cool. Well, I'm gonna end it there, and I maybe chat with you later about those playlists that you were creating back in the day.
Yeah,
But
absolutely.
great to chat with you, and I'll share this up once it's cut and ready. But thanks, man. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Garrett.
All right. Take care.
Yeah.
Well, there you have it. My interview with Jake from Serek Bases in Chicago. If you like what you heard, I think you're supposed to like or follow or subscribe. I think there's buttons. I don't know. and anyway, we'll see you next time. Thanks.